How are y'all doing today? I'm going to introduce Dennis Ross, who is our congressman and certainly a dear friend of mine. We've been working on this legislation together that I think is very, very meaningful. However, I'm going to let him speak first because he is in charge of the legislation and the process, and then I'll offer some information as soon as he's finished. Congressman Ross?
Thank you, Sheriff.
Thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon. Sheriff Judd has been known nationwide for his aggressive efforts in trying to stem the tide on sexual predators. His track record is phenomenal, and I had an opportunity to meet with him some time ago to find out how we can help legislatively help him in his job. And so what we've done is we've created a piece of legislation that we filed called Protecting Our Children Act. And what this legislation does is that it empowers law enforcement with an additional tool that is an option for employers to use when they have employees who are going to be in close contact with children, minor children, either in a supervised or unsupervised capacity. And what this extra tool is to allow for a polygraph of the prospective employee. The prospective employee will know well in advance whether that it's going to be required and whether they want to have employment there is going to be contingent upon taking this. It will not cost the employee any extra money. But what it does is it allows for employers to know ahead of time whether this person has a propensity to be a sexual predator. A lot of the ones that have been caught through stings or otherwise have slipped through the cracks. A lot of them are found through background checks, criminal background checks. But it's those who have the propensity that don't have the criminal record are the ones we're trying to make sure we get. And so what we've done is we filed this legislation with a great deal of consult from Sheriff Judd, and we're hoping that employers will look at this as an opportunity. It doesn't mandate anything. There's no appropriation of funds. This is simply another opportunity for employers who wish to do the right thing when they have employees who may be dealing with unsupervised children to find out what the propensity may be of that particular employee. And with that, Sheriff, I'll turn it back over to you for any questions.
Thank you. You know, we just did an operation a couple of weeks ago with our partners from Lake County. We arrested 22 people who were child predators, who were coming there to specifically try to have sex with children as young as 12 years of age. How many of them did we know was a sexual offender or sexual predator was registered? 2 of the 22. About 2 years ago, we did another operation where, in this county, where we arrested over 40. How many of those were registered sexual predators or offenders? 2. So it's not the sexual predators and offenders we worry about the most. We know who they are. We keep track of them. We're worried about that overwhelming number of people that we have no idea that they're out there crawling around every day looking to groom our very young children and take them as sex slaves. Now let's tie this together. Then we do a press release, and it's 3 theme park workers. It's a small business that keeps children. That's one of the children's have been attacked, and we wonder, how can that happen? Well, it can happen because many, many years ago, the federal government specifically prohibited polygraph examinations for potential employees. Well, certainly their intent was good, but there's a loophole there. Currently, private employees or employers can't even ask the simple question, are you a sex predator? Do you want to take advantage of children? And yet you are going to work them around children every day. So if someone comes to you to work for you and your employment or your business is dealing with small children, then you can do background investigations, but you can't ask that magic question and have any way to verify it. Well, it's too late after your employee has sexually abused a child. It's too late. So what Congressman Ross is doing, to me, is a wonderful thing, and it should be a no-brainer for the other legislators to say, you know, we've got to fix this loophole that's in the federal law. As a result, then they can have the opportunities that we have in law enforcement. We can polygraph and specifically ask questions that are of that nature. And with Congressman Ross's efforts here today, as soon as we can pass it, then we can give one more tool for private employers across this state and nation so that they too can check to make sure they don't have someone actively working around children every day that has a proclivity to sexually abuse them. With that, any questions?
You say this will allow companies to ask that question. Is that something separate, or is that what you're talking about? Is now that they can go have this polygraph, which I imagine is a third party, another office that administers it, not Disney per se? And who are you saying can ask that question? Can Disney now ask that question, what you just said?
You can do a background investigation now, but you can't verify your answers. So you do a background investigation. You can look to see if they've got a criminal arrest. You can see if they're a registered sexual predator or offender, but you can't give them a test to determine that. You can't give them a polygraph examination. And we're going, why wouldn't you want that? Why can't private employers have that extra tool in their tool belt when they do a background? If they're going to have the liability of that person, and certainly ultimately they're going to be civilly liable if something goes wrong, how can we not allow them to test and make sure that person is not a child predator? And if you want to forget the civil liability, we would have had a chance to keep that person away from the child that he sexually abused because he met this child while at work. So at the end of the day, when you see these arrests being made and you go, why didn't the theme parks check? It's a criminal penalty against them if they do. So give them the tools, give private industry the tools to simply, very narrowly focus and tailor questions about, hey, do you have a proclivity to abuse children? Since, by the way, you're wanting a job here in an industry that is built around children.
And these questions will be asked at a polygraph, correct? 'Cause it sounds like you're saying that's separate.
At a polygraph.
At a polygraph, okay.
Will this bill also kind of regulate like the questions that?
No, actually, this bill doesn't do anything to identify or set forth what criteria must be asked, but it does allow for the employer to choose a third party or the employer themselves, as long as it's consistent, to have a polygraph test administered with the questions that they deem to be appropriate by way of a professional who's trained in this, and I'm sure they'll do it in conjunction with law enforcement, so that they can find out, as the sheriff pointed out, if they have a proclivity for sexual predator behavior. So this legislation doesn't dictate or mandate or otherwise suggest questions. It just allows for the employer to go out and find that particular agency or third party in order to ask the questions they believe are going to be appropriate to identify these types of people.
Congressman, what are the chances of a major company like Disney actually doing this?
You know, I've talked to Disney about this, and I think they would like to have it available to them, and then they'll have their legal department look at the ramifications of making sure that it's administered appropriately across the board so that there aren't discrimination claims for not actually doing it to everybody as they should, depending on the agency that they use or the department that they use that is going to have the most or greatest exposure for children. But I think, again, as the sheriff points out, you know, when you get civil liability from this, just alone, the criminal liability is outrageous, but the civil liability, there becomes a cost-benefit analysis that a lot of these employers are going to look at and say, you know, it's worth the investment to have this in there so that we don't have the civil liability hitting us on the back end. But most importantly, if it saves one child, then the legislation has more than met its objective.
What kind of cost do you think the employer is looking at on average per test?
I do not know that at all. I do not know what the cost is for this. Again, that would be left up to the employers and their relationship with whomever is going to administer the test and whatever arrangement they can make with them.
So the employer will pay for the cost, not.
Correct.
As it stands, an employee pays for the cost of a background check.
Correct.
The employer. Let me suggest this to you. and we know this from research. People don't wake up at 30, 35, 40 and say, gosh, I'll go out and groom a child today and have sex with that 12-year-old kid. That person has that proclivity and has had that proclivity and has more than likely acted out on it, or either has worked their way through the pornography and the child pornography and the more dangerous and the more risky all through their adult life. They don't wake up at 25, 30, 35, and 40 and try this for the first time. They are out there. All we have to do is give the tools to the employers to weed them out and keep them away from our children. So who doesn't want to do that?
In that proposal, will there be a standardization of questions? It sounds like each question is tailor-made. And
No, it depends on, again, on the situation. There's nothing in the legislation that sets forth any particular criteria for the questions. Again, it just allows for the taking of the polygraph exam. It depends on the type of employer. I mean, obviously, it's directed towards those employers that deal with unsupervised or supervised children, so it would have to deal particularly close to that particular style of employment.
When you give a polygraph examination, you ask the definitive question, yes or no, okay? So it will be narrowly focused and narrowly tailored. On a polygraph, you can't shotgun a question that takes in everything. So you'll narrowly focus and tailor the question, and that's what it will be limited to. And quite frankly, at the end of the day, what's not to like about this? Which one of the members of Congress want a sexual predator working with their children? Zero. Which person in the United States says, oh, it's okay to have this deviant, this sexual offender working with my child or working where my child's going to be? Who wants that? So if we don't want it, we have to give the employers the tools. And with the tools, then comes the liability. Well, you could have prevented this. Why didn't you use the polygraph? We'll see what happens.
How effective are polygraph tests, and are you worried that some people could have slipping up answers to get around it, or is it a situation where, at least you have it there to check them, at least you have protection in place?
There is no tool, there's no employment tool that's 100% correct. Polygraphs read emotional reactions. I can tell you quite frankly, I remember us giving a polygraph to a young man that committed a murder one time, and he was total straight line. He had no emotional response at all to anything. Now, he is the huge, rare exception, but even the polygraphist can tell by the reaction that this guy is not going to respond or report on the polygraph, but that's the rare exception. I can tell you overwhelmingly that it is just another hiring tool. We don't rely specifically on the polygraph, but when we give a polygraph examination, it also leads us in other directions that we need to do background investigations. It shows us red flags, or it gives us an opportunity for the person to explain themselves and why they might have had that reaction. But keep in mind, the potential employee won't have this sprung on them as a surprise. They'll know in advance. If you want to work for ABC company that is in the child business, this is a requirement. And after all, if I'm going to work around children all day, why do I mind taking a polygraph to say that I'm clean? I have a measure of comfort knowing that my coworkers and I all work under the same standards. Why wouldn't we want to do that? And certainly if I'm going to do business with that company, if I'm going to send my children or grandchildren there, I certainly want to know that they're going to be safe. And I would be the one advertising. If I was in a competitive business, I'd be the one saying, oh, by the way, my employees all passed a polygraph, And does that mean 100% of them are never, ever, ever going to be or aren't sexual offenders that are undetected? No, but there is an overwhelming preponderance of evidence that we've done everything we could to keep your child safe and to keep that element out of our workforce. Nothing's perfect in the world. Polygraph's just another tool.
Some examples of the questions that could be asked potentially, that could shed light on this.
Do you like to have sex with children?
I think it seems obvious.
No, that's it.
Okay.
That's it. Do you like to have sex with children? And if it goes, ooh, you go, we got a problem. That's how easy it is. Do you have child pornography that indicates you have sex with children?
The reason I bring it up because Supreme Court in 1988 struck down polygraphs as admissible in court. So obviously, if they think it's not a valid tool,
We're not trying these people.
I recognize that, but doesn't mean it's. I'm just saying I have to ask a hard question here.
It's not hard.
Okay, well,
It's the easy question. The easy question is this: we're not trying you, we're offering you a job. If you want to work around my child, you take a polygraph. If you don't, get out of here. We're not asking you about your social life. We're asking you if you like to have sex with little boys and little girls. And if you can't pass that question on a polygraph, I don't want you around my kids. And if you got a problem with that, you got a problem.
Just want to clarify something. You said there's no guidelines in the questions, but this is actually narrowly construed for basically trying to root out sexual predators. Is there any way for, say, a potential employer to use this law to ask questions outside of that scope?
It would be violating the law.
Correct. It would. It would violate the law. Look, this is an exemption to the Employee Polygraph Protection Act of 1988. And so what this does is to allow for a narrow exemption strictly with regard to employers who are going to be having employees deal with supervised or unsupervised children. The scope of this polygraph will deal in that particular arena, and it cannot be used for other investigations or types of behavior.
So they can't ask if you've ever sold illegal drugs or done any other things.
That's right.
illegally.
Correct. And to the extent that the experts, if you will, who are administering the polygraph believe that the questions that they're all asking will lead to an assumption, if nothing else, that this person has the proclivity for sexual predator behavior, we leave it up to the experts.
Have you polled your colleagues in terms of support, and how confident are you that it's going to reach?
Well, no, we've not, but we'll do a Dear Colleague letter now and go out and ask for support from our colleagues. I doubt we're going to find many of my colleagues who are opposed to it, not only for practical reasons, but for political reasons too. Who should be against this? A sexual predator should be against it. Again, it's not mandating anything. It's not an appropriation that the government's going to have to bear. This is strictly to allow employers that extra tool to make sure that they've got good employees that aren't going to lead to another sexual predator attack.
Confident it's going to get to a vote in the House?
I'm going to do everything we can. You know, the way things work in Congress is we get a lot of support on a standalone bill, and hopefully we have an opportunity to put it on something that's going to pass.
And what happened last year when you did introduce this a year ago?
Correct. It has been not quite a year, I don't believe, but we got a great deal of support. Actually, we had nobody come out of the woodwork against it. So we feel that if we get the right start, and quite frankly, having Sheriff Judd help us on this gives a great deal of credibility for my colleagues to jump on board.
So this is just another legislative session that you're introducing it?
Yes.
You did introduce it?
Yes, we did it. We did it in the 113th Congress. We're now in the 114th Congress. This is we'll pursue this for the next 18 months.
The key to it is, if you look at the legislation specifically, the employee gets a copy of the question
Yes.
and the results. So there's no hidden agenda. It's not like you can wander off and start asking them about their drug use or whether they paid their bills or, you know, what their.
If the person failed the test, would it stop them from applying for another job? Because there are some jobs like that you get dinged once. The next employer don't have to take the test because you have a history now of failing this test. Will there be any ramifications like that you know of?
Again,
Health insurance is that way.
No, this is all private and confidential. And that privilege rests with the employee or the prospective employee. If they wish to break that privilege and tell people that they failed it, then they do so at their own peril. But the employer in no way can go out and say, you know, this person, you shouldn't hire them, or they failed their test. This is strictly confidential, and then the employee is the one that has that privilege.
At the end of the day, right now, someone who has a proclivity to have sex with children can go down to any of your large theme parks, can go to any of your churches, can go to any of your private businesses and apply to work there. If they don't have a criminal history, if they're not designated as a sexual predator or a sexual offender, if a previous employer doesn't fill out a form and say, I ran him off for the lewd comments and touching children inappropriately, you don't know. And now we're giving you a tool so you can know.
Grady, in all these things that you do, how often do you find a theme park employee or a former employee? Do you have a number or?
Every time. Every time. And it goes back to what I've said before in all the press conferences. You already have it on tape. They asked Willie Sutton way back in the day, why do you rob banks? And he said, that's where the money is. Well, why do these people work at theme parks and work at churches and work at daycares? Because that's where the children are.
Are teachers still exempt, by the way?
Actually, state and state employees are exempt from the act, so they can be polygraphed. Teachers can be polygraphed. It's a question of whether the school boards choose to do that. If you look under the exemptions under the Employee Polygraph Protection Act, state and municipal and county employees are exempt and can be tested. It's just that whether the school boards choose to do it.
And I found that interesting because I have said before, we're not giving the school board the tools, but Congressman Ross brought me the federal legislation. All school boards across this nation can give polygraphs to determine whether or not their teachers have a proclivity to engage in inappropriate sexual conduct with children.
Most of them don't.
I don't know. You'll have to ask them that question. And the question is, if they don't, why don't they? They should. They all should. And this is a passion not only of mine, not only of the congressman's, but of the community. I want my children safe. And if I don't have the tool as an employer to check, how do you hold me liable, civilly or criminally? I mean, why do I get smeared around in the newspaper for something? There's no way for me to check the background of these folks. And then they come to work for me and do something really, really outrageous and sickening. And it's like, how was I supposed to know? Now they can know. And we've already set the standard across this state and across this nation. We'll already designate you a sexual predator and a sexual offender if you plead or are convicted, right? So why, as an employer, can't we at least privately ask the question to determine whether or not we want you around children in our business? Well, Congressman Ross and I think you should. And we believe the overwhelming majority of the people in this nation think you should be able to have those tools as an employer and keep the predators away from our kids, where our kids want to play, where they want to interact, or where they have to go to daycare. You realize that? You send your kid to daycare, your grandchildren to daycare today, they can't ask the question. But with this new tool, they can. So think about that. The next time you drop your child off at daycare, the daycare workers there can't be tested by their employer on a polygraph to see if they have the proclivity to engage children in sex. How comfortable does that make you feel?
And we have a copy of the legislation if anybody would like to see, Johnny, our
Wait a
press
minute,
secretary.
is there any more hard questions? Or easy questions?
Congressman, there is no state law that prohibits the teacher, I know you were talking about the federal.
Yeah, and quite frankly, I'm not sure about the state law. I have not looked into that at this point. I'm sure we will. Yeah, we strictly,
I understand that,
yeah,
because I was looking at my notes, and that was the public teachers are exempt from this due to current state law, I wrote, so I didn't know.
yeah, there may be state legislation out there that was passed that prohibits them from being tested. I do not know that, but we'll find out.
Thank you all.
Thank you.